You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. When the road looks rough ahead and you're miles and miles from your nice warm bed, you just remember what your old past said. Boy, you've got a friend in me. Yeah, you've got a friend in me.
You got a friend in me. Oh, you got a friend in me. You got troubles and I got them too. But there isn't anything that I wouldn't do for you. We stick together and can see it through. 'Cause you got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me.
Some of the folks might be a little bit smarter than I am.
Maybe bigger and stronger too.
Maybe, but none of them could ever love you the way I do.
Oh, it's me and you, boy.
And as the years go by,
well, our friendship will never die.
you're gonna see it's our destiny. You got a friend in me.
And you got a friend in me.
Yeah, you got a friend in me.
Congratulations, Canon. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, you too.
It's a miracle that this marsh exists. I've been reading the history more and more, looking back. It goes back 10,000 years if you want to begin the history of Belle Marsh. But in the turn of the century, and especially when the airport took over Wood Island, is where the activities of housewives who were so outraged by the fact that one of the islands that was part of the Emerald Necklace of Boston was taken over by the airport and basically destroyed. It was an Olmsted Park, it was beautiful, and they did away with it. Sort of somewhere down the line when, it changed hands to the Metropolitan District Commission and then finally to DCR, what happens is that, many people wanted to develop this area, which would have meant landfilling it and then developing it. But it survived, and it survived because a group of birders 40 years ago, and our own Gail Miller and Barbara and Mary and others who are still on the board here, were part of that initial group that got things going and began joining at a very young time in the history of the Friends of Belle Marsh, to make sure that this would continue. I hope that all of you have joined the Friends of Belle Marsh. It's a very low admission fee that belong, and I hope that all of you support this because it's really important. Today's speaker, Melanie Girarte, from the Boston Harbor Now and the Stone Living Lab, which are groups that are interested in sea level rise and how they proceed with climate change, along with other groups, play an important part on getting action done to not only protect the marsh, but protect Boston. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Melanie Duarte.
Thanks so much, everybody. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm so honored. Emma Gildensgame was supposed to also present with me from the Nature Conservancy. Oh, I got it.
You bet.
Yeah, it's fine. But she had some family matters come up today, so she sends her best regards, and I'm here to represent both of us. I am very honored to be here today. I've been working for a while in the Belle Marsh area. I think this is a safe place to say that I was a coastal waterbird monitor for Mass Audubon in the Revere and Winthrop area in the Boston Harbor Islands many seasons ago. So I've been working with DCR, Mass Audubon, and this friends group for a while, and really have fallen in love with Belle Marsh. I was fortunate enough to study salt marshes and mangroves in graduate school. Got to get my hands dirty, collect lots of sediment samples and plant samples, hang out with a bunch of crabs, and really just fell in love with it. Did not fall in love with the mosquitoes though, so stay away in the summertime. I was also fortunate enough to work with the Myra crew, so Mystic River Watershed Association as the Climate Resilience Manager, again in the Belle Marsh area. So just working here has given me so much joy, so much pleasure, and I'm excited to now be working with the Stone Living Lab, which is a partnership out of Boston Harbor now and UMass Boston, as well as local federal, city, and state agencies. And we work on researching nature-based approaches. So who has heard nature-based approaches or nature-based solutions before? You raise your hands. So a few of us have, a few of us haven't. Many people hear that phrase and just kind of go like, okay, that sounds about right, but don't really know what that means. So we wanted to, me and Emma wanted to come here to just give a little bit of background information about what nature-based approaches are. And a little hint, we are looking over and involved with a nature-based approach to coastal climate resilience. And so, just as a, let's have a quick backdrop and zone in on the moment that we're facing. We're facing a hard time, right? It's been difficult to see our beloved coasts and inland and other ecosystems being inundated by flooding. Some of our coastal systems have been eroding at an increasingly rapid rate. It's been extremely hard to watch some of our communities face more extreme heat than other communities based on access to green spaces, and increasingly hotter summers where it's really hard to just be outside. We're New Englanders, we like to, or we look forward to the summertime to be able to enjoy the good weather, good beaches, and now it's like, oh, I need to hang out inside in the AC because it's just too hot to do anything. And also drought. So we're not facing a type of drought and dry environment like the West Coast and all of these extreme wildfires that are really devastating, but our ecosystem, our forests, our wetlands depend on a certain amount of water that just isn't coming now, and all of this is due to climate change as well as other impacting factors. And so one way that we can approach this issue, which has been the traditional way, is just to build up walls to protect us from coastal storms, right? Or to keep the water away. But there are other ways that we can also help to protect our natural ecosystems, and that is learning from those very same ecosystems that we're trying to protect. And so nature-based approaches, also termed nature-based solutions, work with nature to provide long-term solutions that benefit both people and the environment. So what does that mean? One example is a wetland. So this is a freshwater wetland in the Charles River. These wetlands, as you know, are able to act like sponges, just like Belle Marsh, to soak up all of this excess water coming through. And in the process, they protect our human people communities, but then they also provide habitat for all of the animals and plants that depend on these ecosystems. And so we're able to protect both people and our naturally occurring environment. As I spoke about, our typical way of figuring out solutions is by gray infrastructure. So that means a big seawall, essentially, to cut off the excess stormwater from coming through to our coastal communities or riverine communities. However, there has been research shown that seawalls only go so far, right? I think we see it every time there's a northeastern in Revere and Winthrop, when the waters just topple over the seawall, the road is just inundated with water, and then it ends up in our homes, and then it takes so much time to come back from that, right? DCR is very helpful in trying to mitigate that and see what happens, and try to protect the communities. But what if we were able to return to our naturally occurring ecosystems? The majority of the Massachusetts coastline used to be this beautiful salt marsh that we see and are trying to protect, like Belle Marsh. It used to be sand dunes where birds could nest, and wildflowers can bloom. So these ecosystems are in some ways better at protecting our natural environments from all of these impacts from climate change. And so they're here to be sustainable, flexible, adaptable, just like we want to give Belle Marsh the opportunity to migrate during future climate change scenarios that are getting warmer and sea levels are rising. We also want to give the opportunity for all of the other animals and flora and fauna to continue to be flexible and adaptable with these changing ecosystems. And so these strategies can often work together with traditional artificial structures as well. So you can mix both green infrastructure and gray infrastructure projects. So one example is, again, Belle Marsh. So this term living shoreline essentially means a vegetated coastal ecosystem. And so one example is a salt marsh. Other examples in other areas of the world can be mangroves, so they're the wetland equivalent in the tropical areas, and oyster reefs. Oyster reefs used to also be all around the Massachusetts coast as well. Another example that is also very familiar to some of you is cobble berms at Coughlin Park. And so usually when I say the word cobble berm, people go, what? What does that even mean? Well, a berm is essentially a raised surface that can be naturally occurring, and cobbles are essentially just large rocks. And so large rocks are able to move around depending on what wave action is coming through, and are able to protect the areas behind it, especially in regards to erosion and storm surge. A real-world example of a natural or nature-based approach is the Living Breakwaters project. And apologies, the shift from the Mac to the PC did shift a little bit of my slides here. Has anyone heard of Living Breakwaters or the Billion Oyster Project? I think some of you have, yeah. So once you hear it, you probably will start hearing it over and over. So Living Breakwaters is this project off Staten Island in New York. And this project got started after Hurricane Sandy. So I think some of us remember Hurricane Sandy. We also remember missing it here in the Boston area if it had occurred just a few hours later, and if it had been during our high tide, we would have faced those devastating impacts as well, right? And unfortunately, New York had really devastating impacts to both their natural coastal ecosystems and their people. And so there was research done after that unfortunate storm that looked at all of the areas on Staten Island and other areas in New York City that had nature-based systems like oyster reefs or salt marshes, and compared them to other areas that were more based on gray infrastructure, like really large seawalls, for example. And what they showed was that the areas that were naturally protected by these ecosystems fared way better than the areas that had the gray infrastructure, because seawalls tend to only help in regards to your regular occurring storms, not these extreme storms that come through and really cause a lot of harm. And so what they did was they started to create this breakwaters project where they're essentially putting these big pilings that allow for oysters and other organisms to grow and live upon them. And so that helps, it doesn't keep the water away, but it slows down the water and slows the impact and lessens the impact to the areas right behind it. And so there's been this big effort in New York to try and implement these nature-based solutions using all of these systems that we already know and love, and engage the community while doing it. Another quick example here is a mixture. So I said that you can mix nature-based approaches and typical great infrastructure to help with stormwater runoff and things like that. So there's a good example of, sorry, getting turned around here. Here's a good example of something right on a university campus that is helping with stormwater flow. Another example are living seawalls. And so we can't help, at least to some degree, the fact that there are existing seawalls in an area, right? They've already been there. It's probably going to take many years for them to be able to be removed and be incorporated with new ecosystems and nature-based approaches. But the area around the seawall still needs help, and they still need resilience. And lots of seawalls actually cut off naturally biofouling organisms like your mussels, your clams, your oysters, and all the little critters that help create an ecosystem. And so an organization in Australia has created essentially these panels that mimic the natural surfaces of an ecosystem depending on the location, so that other little critters, like the crabs that I really love, can actually make a home in those areas. And so that improves the ecosystem biodiversity, that improves the water quality of the area, and so therefore that improves the resilience of that ecosystem. And so, for example, in places like Australia, they have these beautiful mangrove trees that have these giant roots that come up over the water, and animals typically grow on them. And so they've made these panels to mimic the mangrove roots as well. So we at the Living Lab are going to be installing panels in 2 locations in the Boston Harbor. We haven't picked them yet. Potentially one in East Boston. So that way we can improve the resiliency of that ecosystem. Green infrastructure also is an opportunity for jobs, right? And so we have to train our workforce, our emerging workforce, to be able to be part of this climate conversation and be involved in this just transition. And protect their communities as well. And so this is an example for the Nature Conservancy worked with the Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation to get folks trained on green jobs and specifically on green infrastructure. And so more than 2,000 green infrastructure projects in Boston alone they've worked on. They've created they've co-created with the community to build in multiple benefits, so not just benefits for the ecosystem, but benefits for the communities in the area. And this is a training and certification pathway for good local jobs, maintaining and inspecting green infrastructure. And so it's not just enough to, incorporate a nature-based approach or green infrastructure in an area. You also have to make sure to maintain it and, think about invasive species and things like that. Nature-based approaches also really rely on important collaboration. So the collaboration at the Stone Living Lab, for example, is between a nonprofit, Boston Harbor Now, where I work, and UMass Boston, a research institution, as well as involving the Department of Energy and Environmental Affairs, DCR, and the City of Boston and the National Park Service to make sure that we're working together to advance all of these issues. But we also have to acknowledge that sometimes when you prioritize one thing, another area has to move down the line, right? And so building a project like for Belle Marsh, if we were only thinking about protecting the salt marsh sparrow, perhaps the resilient solutions would look a little bit different if we were only focusing on that, but we're also focusing on other areas like protecting our people, protecting or restoring parts of the marsh that has been overtaken by Phragmites. But Phragmites is also now an important area for the red-winged blackbirds. So there are all of these interests that we have to take into account, and there's no one-size-fits-all scenario, and we have to be able to have these conversations and talk about site-specific solutions and ways to protect multiple priorities. Move on. And so to quickly summarize, equitable climate resilience really relies on co-creation and trust building with the community. So much of that is being done right here through this group, which is really beautiful to see. We need to have clear, accessible, values-driven communication. We have to be able to talk to one another. We have to understand these terms. We have to be able to evolve. The climate is changing, and we also have to change. Strong, wide-reaching partnerships are increasingly important. And being able to be creative and innovative and understanding that we can have this green-gray gradient until we reach a really appropriate solutions depending on the location that we're talking about. And so I will end there. Please reach out if you have any questions. That is actually not my correct email. I will do it. I think I misspelled that. But Emma, again, sends all her best. She's an amazing climate adaptation professional. We both do a lot of climate communication work, so please let us know if you need anything. Thanks.
One more round of applause to Melanie. So Melanie, I heard you say people can reach out to you if they have questions. Did I hear that right? Yeah. Does anybody have any questions now that Melanie can answer? Yes, there are questions. If you don't.
Oh yeah. Wasn't sure of the timeline of things.
No, it's as long as you're okay.
Hello. Yes.
I love your idea that the green seawalls. We've got tons of seawalls
I know.
all around us. Is there any group that's trying to convert them to green seawalls that I can volunteer with? Because I would love that project. I think that would be a great
It would be so
project.
fun. Yes, so the Stone Living Lab, we're working on installing panels at least in 2 locations in the harbor. We're still looking at different sites and figuring out which is the best one. And so if you follow us or send me an email, I will put up the screen again with my correct email. I don't know what happened there. You can definitely reach out to me. I also have a few cards. And I think what comes to mind right now is, an area like Short Beach, there's that giant seawall. So also an area that comes to mind is Chelsea Creek. So that's pretty polluted area. There's a site on East Boston. There's a site on Chelsea Creek. Perhaps installing these panels in that area could also help the water quality there. So yeah, definitely feel free to reach out. We're gonna be needing volunteers to help monitor them. So one of the things that the Stone Living Lab does is making sure to figure out, is this working or not? If we install these panels in these 2 locations, is it really going to help improve the habitat? We also don't want to create more habitat for invasive species, so we have to kind of tease all of that out, and then we'll be asking for volunteers to help monitor.
And the oyster project too? Are you looking for volunteers?
The oyster project, that was an example from New York. We actually can't build oyster reefs in the harbor. It's against the current regulatory standards because of potential for folks harvesting them and eating them and being contaminated. Yes. However, there are areas like in the New York harbor that also have oyster reefs, like in the example I showed, and they have similar water quality to us. So the Soul Living Lab is also interested in understanding more if we could potentially shift or do research to help shift that narrative, because oysters are also important to this
But out of
area.
the harbor, or in areas out of the harbor, can that be done?
I'm pretty sure it's in all of Massachusetts. Does anyone know? Yes.
Partially a documentary issue. It is something that's being looked at. I worked on the New York project that you mentioned, and I think it's just a little different in terms of what level of access there is. And there's some Army Corps,
Right.
but it can get permitted. It's just going to take a little bit of push here.
There are other reefs that don't specifically target oysters in the harbor that have been built. I think there's one on one of the islands as well, but yeah. Yeah, and my understanding also is that there were a lot of oysters in this area, but they weren't necessarily reef builders. They more laid down beds, large beds of them, and so that also would have to be looked at to see if they would even be successful in this area.
Because like 1800s, they said you could walk across oyster beds. I think Oyster Bay, Long Island, or whatever was down there, was just filled with them.
There's a million oysters at Coffin Park.
Yeah, I mean, it is
And
their
also,
habitat.
on Bayswater, next to the Orient Heights Yacht Club, that whole area is, 10 years ago, there probably were no oysters there. And now there are thousands.
There's another question.
Oh, yes.
There's off of Winter Beach, there are these big breakwaters.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yes, is there any thought of increasing the size of those to reduce the ferocity of the bad storms that bring the water up onto the roads of Winthrop?
Not to my knowledge, but I will definitely bring that up with the researchers. Does anyone know if there's any activity? Well, the thing is, we don't want to create such large structures that actually totally blocks off the water from here, because there needs to be water feeding into the beach and the dunes and everything. So we don't want to totally block it off.
But just a little bit,
Right.
to prevent what happens.
Yeah.
Because what happens is so destructive. I mean, the water's
Exactly.
going right down the boulevard there. It's horrible.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, I think right here.
Yes, could I please have your card? I'd like
Yes.
to engineer having you come to my home, which is on Fisherman's Bend. It's another salt marsh. It's highly abused and not used properly, but it's also a wonderful place for migrating birds and one-eyed butterflies. And as part of my role to my community, I'd like to get my neighborhood involved in getting a cleanup there. And I've had a lot of,
That'd be a good cleanup. Let's do it.
so can I?
Yes, I'll give you my card. Yes. Here in the back there. Yeah. Emerald Tutu. So not fully. So for those of you who don't know, Emerald Tutu is, I forget what the name stands for. It's a little funny name. Emerald Tutu is focusing on floating marshes. There has been some research on floating freshwater marshes that I'm aware of, and both of them are really focused on, this is also a seasonal thing, so increasing water quality benefits and also just more visually pleasing, increasing green spaces. And so the Emerald Tutu, I believe, is also looking into seeing if this could help with coastal storms. I'm not too sure that it would be fully helpful, since the whole point of a wetland is that it's a land-based ecosystem. Needs lots of dirt, lots of sediment. And the sediment is where all of that carbon is stored. So, if we're thinking of increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, wetlands are an incredibly important solution at actually mitigating. And so they're looking into that, I believe, as part of their research. I don't know if it will actually help in terms of coastal storms and things like that. Kind of imagining just like plants falling. I call over boats if a storm would come through, but they may have potential benefits other than for water quality scenarios. Yes.
Down Crofton Park, I went down to hear some people speak. I think they were from your place, and they planted grass and so forth. But you haven't mentioned, but she showed me different areas that where they planted tall, water type.
Yes. So just in case you didn't hear, Coughlin Park, that is an active project of the Stone Living Lab that started before I came on, so I don't know too much about it. But that is essentially a place where cobble berm was incorporated into the ecosystem, some salt marsh restoration, and so our partners at Woods Hole Group go there to monitor and that space. And I believe the town of Winthrop is responsible for for the monitoring and invasive species removal and maintenance. Yes.
This is more of an impact question, but as a gardener, I know about the issue with neonicotinoids and loss of bee population. Has that had any particular effect on wetlands, or has anyone looked at pesticide contamination, which we know exists, but what the level is, or what the identification?
That is a good question. I'm not sure about pesticide impact. I'm sure it's not great. Does anyone have any more details?
When Sean comes up, we can.
It's not much going on. At least at our site, we're not testing for that. But like you said, pesticides and all sorts of chemical contaminants are certainly a very prevalent issue and concern in all these ecosystems.
Thank you. Alrighty. Well, I will pull out my cards and hand them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. So, I hope you caught most, if not all, of what Melanie was talking about there. We're all part of nature, even though sometimes we think nature is something we drive out to in the weekend. It's just what we're products of and we're part of. And to that extent, nature basically knows what to do, having created us and having nourished us all this time. And the spirit of this idea is to tune into nature and figure out our solutions based on nature. So in that spirit, I really appreciate the talk. Thank you again, Melanie. And Melanie's available to answer more questions, as you said. So if you have more, it can be, if not right now, it can be later. So I mentioned there are a couple of things after the guest speaker. One is a treat. It's our own Sean Riley. We haven't heard from him yet, except when he quickly answered that question. He has a lot more to offer. So I want to ask him to come up here and do his report, do his spiel, and after that I'll be back for a quick few minutes.
I don't know about a treat, but here I am. Just a few things. I wrote it down because I'm usually unorganized. So again, thanks to Melanie, who actually was the first person. Melanie and I were the first ones to go out at Belle Isle and to do the initial salt marsh sparrow survey. So Melanie's been around the marsh for a while now. But I guess first start off again for a big thank you to Mary, who for this restoration phase, since she's been president, has been sort of instrumental in getting this all done. And her and I have been in meetings like every week for the past 3 years. So it's an unbelievable amount of work the past few years. So another round of applause for Mary. So we just, our Osprey camera was just turned on again. The Osprey are not back yet. They showed up about April 1st last year. But big thanks to Anna who got that going. The past couple of years, Connor and myself, I've been out in the marsh with a laptop and he's been yelling at Verizon. So it's been a couple of terrible years getting this thing off the ground. So this year was incredible. So very, very exciting. We had over 1 million viewers for the Friends of Belle Isle Marsh Osprey camera the past few years, so that's pretty exciting. Unfortunately, our Osprey haven't been terribly cooperative with raising their young wonderfully, but this year I can feel that this is going to be the year. So, going back to what I was saying that's been taking place the past 3 years, our restoration modeling for the reservation is finally done. So the Woods Hole group did all the modeling and all the scientific work behind the scenes, analyzing what's going on at the marsh and what we can hopefully do for the future. So now that we've gathered all that information, we're in the next phase where we're moving towards the actual restoration phases. We've identified our first site. We're looking at a chunk of high marsh in the reservation, which has our entire population of salt marsh sparrows. And probably the high marsh is our most rapidly degrading habitat in the marsh. So salt marsh sparrows, I know I talk about it probably every year, but they're species that are going extinct before our eyes. We have a pretty robust population for such a small reservation. Because of our research efforts, we know we have like over 60 birds there, and for a little small habitat tract of only a few acres, that's pretty impressive. And also because of the research we've been doing, we know that these small habitat areas are the key to basically the success of these birds. So they do have a very strong site fidelity, which means that they come back to the same sites every year. Very strong natal site fidelity, so their young are coming back to the same sites. So they're a species that, you take Belle Isle, while it's beloved, is not necessarily the best salt marsh habitat, and yet we have a very large population. So we know that restoring these sites is critical to keeping this species alive. So big thank you to Friends of Belle Isle Marsh. They've sort of pushed all this work across the finish line, along with Mystic River Watershed. I don't know if Kat's here today, but she's been instrumental in getting this done, along with Nature Conservancy, Stone Living Lab, all the municipal partners. So it's a great team of people that we have working on this, and really it's what's going to essentially save this marsh for the next generation. So many of you have been here far longer than me helping this marsh, and I'm sure you've seen, we're in a period of great change at the marsh. So much of the areas of the reservation is starting to look different. Areas of Morton Street are degraded. We're seeing a lot of the trees that have been there a long time that are starting to age out. A lot of our cottonwoods, a lot of our willows were lost. And that's not necessarily climate change related so much as it's poor architecture, landscape design, but they're aging out, but we're working to mitigate that. We planted over 130 trees with the help of Friends of Belle Isle Marsh, City of Boston, and Tree Eastie. So we've got a lot of new trees that are going in, hopefully some new habitat types in there, but you are going to see a lot of change within the reservation. There's also a lot of climate-related change that's going on in the reservation. So a lot of our transitional habitats, areas where there's thickets and sumac, we're getting a lot more salt water that's inundating these areas now, and we're experiencing a lot of dieback in these areas. So that's some more changes that you will see, and that is climate-related. Another thing that's happening with these warmer winters, where we're not getting these cold snaps that will kill off insects. So we finally, it's been a ticking time bomb, but our ash trees in the reservation, emerald ash borer, have finally caught up with some of our trees here. And that's widespread across the city of Boston. I think you're probably hard pressed to find a lot of trees, ash trees, that haven't been basically taken by this. So we'll have a few more years with the ash trees, but again, we're working to do new plantings and rebuild other sections of habitat for things that are being lost to climate change. So again, thank you to everyone that helped with the tree planting project. That was crucial. We really appreciate that. And again, another thank you to Friends of Belle Isle Marsh. So our research station, pretty much almost entirely funded by them. We've had it open, I think, about 3 years now. In that time, we've banded about 1,100 birds on site. Have some really interesting recaptures from other sites. Our birds have been recaptured in Western Mass. We had a salt marsh sparrow this winter that was resighted on its wintering grounds down in South Carolina, and that's a bird that should be back in about the beginning of May, so that's really exciting for us. And these banding projects and research projects that we have there are really helping us to understand the habitat on site. And what we're learning is that these small habitats, even like Belle Isle and the little micro habitats around it, Kilmartin area, Lawn Ave, and some of the little thickets that we have, these are the same birds that we know from banding that are coming back year after year. So preserving these little sections of habitat are critical to our wild bird populations, which we know since the 1970s, we've lost about 4 billion birds. So preserving this habitat is critical for for wildlife and for avian wildlife moving forward. So again, huge thanks to Friends of Belle Marsh. We've had other donations this year from Eastern Mass Hawk Watch, Brookline Bird Club, Northeast Wetland Restoration, and Bear Creek Wildlife Sanctuary, all putting money towards our research funding, which you know, it takes a lot to run the station and our various projects. A lot of equipment. It's all very expensive. This year we've got some neat collaborations with Mass Wildlife, Trustees, Mass Audubon, Essex County Greenbelt. We're pioneering a lot of the work with salt marsh sparrows and understanding their population demographics. And this is a model that's going to start being used statewide. So we're doing some trainings for other agencies, and we're helping out at some other sites up in the Great Marsh this year, helping them get a handle on what their salt marsh sparrow populations are. So these are all collaborations we're very excited about. And again, all this research pretty much possible because of this group here. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Our walks are still first and third Saturday of the month, 7:30. And we're there year round, so come on out and we're out there.
Sean, can you just say something about coyotes?
Sorry, say that.
Can you say something about coyotes?
Sure, yeah.
We're gonna have a.
Yeah, oh yeah, so we're gonna do like a forum on eastern coyotes. I know there's some issues in abutting communities about that. So we want to kind of clear up some of the misinformation on the species, and there's something that, I see them every day in the reservation. They're a critical part to our food chain and keeping these places in balance. So, we're going to figure out a date to try to talk about, the relationship everyone has with these animals in the community. And the reality is they've been here for a very long time. It's just with social media, people are, they think that they're around a lot more, but they're the same populations that were here 20 years ago. So, yeah, we'll put that on the agenda, and hopefully people can attend that as well. So,
I'm also a volunteer for Latino Outdoors Boston. We started a chapter a couple years ago, and I'm leading a monthly bird walk at Belle Marsh on the I think it was the first Saturday of the month, which was supposed to be yesterday. Wait, no, second? I forget. Anyways, we had to postpone it because of the weather yesterday, and so I'm definitely gonna butt heads with Sean next week on Saturday. We're gonna fight for territory for a bird walk at Belle Marsh. 7:38. Yeah. So I do. Yeah. So nature walk, bird walk. We do a bunch of other events. So if you're interested, also in Latino Outdoors or the community, also let me know about that.
Thank you, Sean. Like I said, Sean is a wealth of information, and he cares and has pretty much all the answers to all our questions. So thank you, Sean. And thanks, Melanie. I think we should include that as well in any notification we send out to the member group. So thank you for sticking around. Just a couple more minutes and we should be done here. And after us, I think the Girl Scouts are coming here, so unless you're planning to spend all your money on cookies, you may want to. So in terms of what to do, I mean, I think it's been made very clear, and you already know, I'm sure, that the marsh is a critical asset. Every way you look at it, and we have to protect that, right? We have to protect nature, because nature protects us. And the marsh is also part of our history, the land history, the way Native Americans have worked with the land and the ocean. The marsh is very much part of that. And even in recent history, people have worked hard to protect the wetlands and the marshes that are there. So in order to protect our history, we have to protect the marsh. And if we're going to have a future, that also is going to depend on nature sticking around to protect us, right? So to protect our history, our future, the tradition, all of that, we need to protect the marsh, which means all of us have to work together. So in just with Friends and DCR and Latino Outdoors and Nature Conservancy, the Wood Soul Group, Myra, and all these caring organizations that are working together, if you're wondering what you can do, there's plenty you can do. If you didn't sign up there, you should sign up. So that anything that you heard today that you were like, well, I'm not clear sure exactly what they said, We'll send out information so you have at least the contact information for all the people that you can ask the questions to. Right? So you can take that forward, get more clarification, get more information about what you can do. And secondly, definitely go to the Marsh. We're talking about a physical, real place here. And being there is really the best way to experience it. So go to the Marsh, join the walks. I know Sean and Melanie are fighting for the space here. It's a good fight. No. Yes, and so join them and go on the bird walk and learn about what the Marsh is able to do for us and what we can do for the Marsh. And you can sign up as well. If you haven't signed up here, you can sign up on the website for the newsletter and to stay informed. friendsofbelleislemarsh.com. I know it's a long name, but it's an easy name. friendsofbelleislemarsh.com. And you can become a member. That's one way you can support and be informed about everything that goes on. And you heard about the camera. The ospreys are not back yet, but we're ready for them. And when they're back, you'll be able to see them right on the website. What's the website? Very good. And attend the events. Besides the walks, there are other events as well. May in the Marsh is coming up. Every now and then there's something that's going on in the Marsh. If you keep an eye on the emails and go to the website, you'll be informed. And we have some social media as well. For those of you on social media, you'll find out through there. And when you go to the Marsh, when you go to these events, it doesn't have to be just you. If you're saying, well, I can't go to the Marsh because I have to babysit, bring the baby. They need to be in this space and enjoy that space. So bring the family, bring friends. And finally, one thing that you can do is to donate to the Marsh. You heard the treasurer give a report on what it takes to maintain the various things that need to be done. And this time, as I was saying earlier, we have staff as well. And luckily, we're able to get some funding from the government, but it wouldn't be sufficient if we want to keep folks long-term and full-time. You don't want to just give people part-time jobs and they have to go and find another part-time job to sustain their life. And neither of the part-time job really gives any benefits. So what you want, any organization should be going for is to employ people full-time, right? And give them benefits. And that's the kind of thing we want to be able to do eventually, and that'll take money. So you can donate yourself as you have some and are able to. You can also advocate. And there are several government meetings, hearings, both at City Hall and State House, and we'll keep you informed on those. And it's good to hear, for elected representatives, there's nothing better than to hear from their own constituents about what people want at the right time, right? So making that time to go to the right hearing and to go to the right meeting and to speak about the Marsh and what we can do here, that would be very helpful. So these are some calls for action that I have for you, and I really want to thank everyone who was here for the whole time. Mary, is there anything else before we close here?
We have a cleanup on Earth Day near the CVS in Wisconsin.
Okay.
At 9 o'clock. So
Right.
April 22nd.
April 22nd is Earth Day, and if you're into cleaning stuff up, some people like that. So, see, Heather's saying I love it. So if you like cleaning up, so come show up and near the CVS on Saratoga Street, and we'll be doing some cleanup. But all of these events, it's hard to keep track. Everybody's got stuff going on, some date, some time, something. It's really hard to keep track. So check on the website, and we'll make all the information available there, so that it'll be one place where you can get what you need, and you can go to the events that you can. So that said, you're welcome to stick around for the Girl Scouts. But were you saying something, Mary? No? Oh, there's coffee and cookies here. Feel free to help yourselves. And I heard, yep, there's a question. Hang on.
And don't use pesticides or rat poison. No pesticides, no rat poison.
No pesticides, no rat poison. Okay, that's a good slogan. So thank you everyone again for being here, and enjoy.